He read an article.
I read it too. Yeah.
It's trending on Twitter.
It's amazing what you can buy on the internet.
I read most of an article about it.
Checked it out on the internet. I was reading this article the other day.
Amy made me watch a documentary.
I checked it out on the internet.
Because hashtag Dave's Party was trending on Twitter.
Everybody saw it on Twitter.
Checked on the internet. Dad, I'm trending on Twitter.
Welcome. I'm Ben Boyce. This is the Dr. Junkie Show, and today is part 2 of my Guide to Board Society of the Spectacle series. If you haven't listened to the last episode, you should definitely start there. But assuming you already have listened, I actually want to start with another outside piece of media. I know, I don't do advertisements, right? But this one's a little bit different. So Macklemore has this song called Wings. You can find a link on the episode description, or you can just watch it on YouTube if you want. It's a song about a young Macklemore being drawn to the magic of Nikes, only to realize later on in life that he was duped, sold a pair of shoes that he thought were so much more than just a pair of shoes. Consumerism, he says in verse 2, led him astray, caused him to base his worth on what he owned. Looking back, he realizes now that Nikes are literally just scraps of leather sewn to a rubber sole that protect your feet. But the magic of Nike? Well, that comes from advertising, from the spectacle. We'll come back to that, but in short, that's what last episode was about, the magic of commodities. Now let's back up a little to get our footing. Karl Marx, the Communist Manifesto guy, he described how the various changes from religious culture, and I mean real religious culture, where people actually used to believe in God 100%, even when they didn't see anything to prove he was real, and they believed everything had to do with God. From weather to natural disasters to the appointment of kings. Marx followed how our change from that to our current more secular culture came with a lot of downsides, including the oppression of the working class by capitalist commodity producers. Of course, Nietzsche started this philosophical line of thought long before Marx, when he forced us to acknowledge that, quote, God is dead, he remains dead, and we have killed him, before going on to emphasize the cultural guilt we all, rightly, feel about having killed God, about having moved beyond our original belief in God as creator, orchestrator, judge, jury, and executioner, to a more contemporary scientific view where phenomena like volcanoes and tornadoes are explained not by blaming an angry God, but by evidence and experimentation. Nietzsche was trying to get us to wake the fuck up and realize that by not vocally and deliberately replacing the center of our world, the God we killed, with some other form of moral guidance, and instead persisting in our claim that we believed in God nonetheless, even though we clearly did not, at least not like before, we allowed ourselves to become unmoored, self-centered, and morally inconsistent. Eventually, we just replaced God with celebrity and moral law with objective inconsistency. Now, Marx came along shortly thereafter and identified this new stand-in God of the era, commodity. But he was writing at a time when things were not like what they're like now. Most wage laborers in Marx's capitalism couldn't afford the products they were producing, and they were working in conditions that we probably wouldn't put up with today. They weren't thinking about that vacation to Vegas this summer, or that new TV they want to buy to replace their perfectly fine 2-inch smaller TV. No. They were living in an era when consumerism, this current pressure we all feel to just keep buying shit all the time, movies, food, pills, adventures, products, fixes, processes, teachers, treatments, theories, that didn't exist yet because the abundance we see everywhere nowadays also didn't exist. The capitalist mode of production hadn't yet expanded enough to fill the entirety of culture with cheap, shiny shit. And this, according to the Frankfurt School, is why Marx's claim that the workers, he called them the proletariat, that they would eventually rise up and take over the factories, kicking out the rich owners and running the shops themselves in a sort of co-op to make distribution of wealth more equitable. That's why the Frankfurt School says that overthrow never happened. At least not yet. It wasn't that the workers changed or that the system of production changed. It was that in the meantime, we managed to rapidly commodify everything, which meant suddenly the working class could be recruited into the ranks of the consuming class. Now, I've talked about the results of this a lot in the last few months, So feel free to check out some of those previous episodes about the Frankfurt School for more on why we all feel so compelled to consume unhealthy, unfulfilling, mindless entertainment after giving half of our waking life to a job that we work not for purpose, but for money. But in short, our culture industry turns out cheap, shallow reproductions of the same story over and over because we are consumers who are exhausted and emotionally unfulfilled. We're primed to start cracking brews and watching reruns of Seinfeld the second we get home from work, just so we can decompress enough to force ourselves to go back all day again tomorrow. Ugh. Now, Guy Debord thinks we've moved on from a commodity culture to a spectacle culture. Everything is represented on screen or piece of paper nowadays. And that's incredibly convenient when you think about the alternative when it comes to learning about things. I don't have to travel to Italy to see the Eiffel Tower, and I don't have to read about it and use my imagination anymore. I can literally bring up hours of live footage and photos from every conceivable angle and lighting. There's even images of Hitler walking under the Eiffel Tower. No wonder we've embraced the spectacle without thinking much about it, to our own detriment. Now back to religion, which I talked about last episode, just for a second. Religion, to remind us, relied and still relies on the old testimonial. Bro, things were so bad, but they're great now that I discovered this fix. We've largely moved as a culture from religion to commodification, aka capitalism, where people have learned to say things like, bro, things were so bad before. I couldn't get out of bed. I was broke. I was depressed. My kids all left me for a better parent. But now I'm hustling, flipping houses, selling horseradish out of the back of my truck. I don't know. I'm making money, accumulating wealth. Success. You should do it too. And now we're in the era when the same thing happens via the spectacle, where you might hear, bro, things were so bad last year, but look at me now. Heart emoji, prayer hands, thanks to all my supporters, and fuck my ex-boyfriend who broke my heart. I've overcome it all. Now that person might very well sign off from their positive post and immediately descend into depression, but it doesn't matter. The spectacle is all we see. It's all that matters. And it's a lot more than the examples I used last week, where you used to get your news from Jim up the street, but now you read it in a newspaper or watch it on Fox News. The system currently works in a way that when somebody asks you what's going on in the world and you share what you've recently learned, they might say, how do you know that? And you'll be forced to respond by citing the spectacle. The problem is that going to a party, or to any event, because I'm actually not a big party guy, the event always offers more information than asking your friend about it the next day. Every representation, every description, from films to TV shows to Instagram posts to news reports and articles to the story your friend tells you, they are always a smashing down, a zooming in, a cutting out, a strategic ignoring of most of what happened in favor of the facts that the writer thinks are most important. If you want to know what's happening in Israel or Gaza, you're probably going to turn on the news and find a short, narrow 3-minute story focused exclusively on one aspect of the war and told from one side. It's no wonder we're all confused, angry, and at each other's throats all the time. The spectacle's main purpose is simply to grow itself. And to grow itself, it must produce contention within the consumer so that they choose the option that feeds their beliefs, their identity, their subconscious drives and desires, which they'll likely never fully uncover, despite the fact that advertisers and news producers know exactly how to press those same buttons. If they can keep us all fighting amongst ourselves and preoccupied with religions we don't even notice, and that we don't care about when we do notice, well then Marx's revolution might never occur. What an idea. Sadly, today, everything we consume works this way. And worse, everything we consume is produced in a fashion that hides the production process from public view. Why? Because as Marx also pointed out, when we can't see how the super soakers and Corvettes are produced, when we can't see that they're just plastic, metal, and grease assembled by exploited workers who aren't paid enough, well then we can replace that production process in our imagination with magic. With feelings and abilities that are not real, yet still feel attached nonetheless. Debord says that the spectacle is not a collection of images, but is instead a social relation among people mediated by images. And here we've arrived back at Macklemore's Nike song, which I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, a song which I'd sample, but ironically, I'd probably get sued, the society of the spectacle being what it is. Macklemore writes that song about being 7 years old and wanting that pair of Nikes because he knew they would make him fly. The bubbles in the heels, the logo, the association with Jordan, it all feels like magic. Of course, if we had known that they were just scraps of painted leather sewn to those rubber soles by exploited workers, well then Nikes wouldn't have felt so magic. But here's what's wild. We all did know that. We just didn't care. It wasn't pressed on us because the spectacle's main goal is always self-growth, advancement, the total occupation of social life. Another Debord quote. We want to feel like we're near Jordan when we buy shoes with his name on them, an emotional connection that Nike seeks to maximize because, as Debord said, it's a social relation among people mediated by images. We literally feel like our hero, Jordan, is somehow on our feet, coaching us in our backyards and making us magically better at basketball. We feel like we have a social relationship with him that was mediated by images that we saw and that compelled us to buy the shoes. And fuck, from here you can probably draw the lines to how you feel about almost everything that surrounds you. The spectacles you fill your house with to show people who you are. The art you hang on your wall to define yourself. The clothing brands you wear or even buy knockoffs of to show the world an image of yourself that you want them to see. An image that only exists because those companies pay celebrities like Caitlin Clark big bucks to wear them on important occasions, thereby locking those brands into consumers' minds as somehow associated with the famous people who wear them, as mediating social relationships. Buy Prada and you're buying a social relationship with Caitlin Clark, not an outfit that's upwards of 200 times more expensive than it would be if the company's goal was to simply sell a nice outfit. Not connection to a cultural hero, not magic. Capitalist producers long ago realized that use value, the value something has because, say, your shirt has a hole in it and you need a new one without a hole, it's far outweighed by commodity value, by the value we put on something based on what we believe the world will think of us when they see us using it. Most of us prefer to buy t-shirts with messages and logos that we feel define us, even though those images only increase commodity value, not use value. We no longer value ourselves based on who we are and what we believe. We value ourselves as if we were commodities with our own non-use value. Our identities come from draping ourselves in expensive, unnecessary products which only make us feel like they do because we've been brainwashed by the companies who make them. I've talked about this before with the cult of pharmacology. In the USA today, we're bombarded with advertisement that promise cures to depression, STIs, skin rashes, low energy, and even diseases like cancer and HIV. None of the promises made by pharma have ever proven 100% true, and yet we continue to buy these products anyway. Hell, last month we learned that almost every cold medicine on store shelves for the last 30 years has done nothing to reduce the symptoms of a cold. What the fuck? We hear about a new potion that can make us feel better, so we go pay to see a doctor, then pay again to get the drug, and it works, kind of, maybe, for a while. And then it stops working, or maybe it never did work, and instead of saying, wait a sec, did pharma lie to me? What the fuck? We go back to the only option in town. We go back to the doctor and big pharma, and we believe the next big promise, the next big lie. We're back in the mindset of religion, where evidence doesn't matter and promises broken are deliberately and conveniently ignored. It's not about the evidence. It's about magic, faith, and a story that allows me to go on living in my cozy illusion. It's not just pharma. It's literally everything. It really is Debord's total occupation of social life. Our media tells us things that turn out to not be true. Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. That hurricane won't hit your neighborhood. The pandemic won't be a big deal. Stock prices are going to drop. Trump is going to lose. And we believe it because we heard people say it, and we trust those people. Then it turns out to not be true, and instead of saying, wait, what the fuck? We go back and listen to the next claims, the next story, the next lie. Like I said last episode, we are all religious. We all know it, and we don't care. It happens with politics, where Trump's big lie presents a culturally ripe example. Many, like me, spent a lot of time looking really hard for the evidence that convinced so many people that the election was stolen, yet finding none. Not one shred. And I've often wondered, where the fuck is it? But that's a misunderstanding of the spectacle. When Tucker Carlson says the election was wonky, or when Alex Jones screams about cheating liberals turning frogs gay, or when Trump repeats for the 1,000th time the lie that the election was stolen by radical leftists or volunteers counting votes late into the night, the religious zealots on his side of the spectacle hear truth. They hear evidence. It doesn't matter that the same truth tellers have lied dozens or even hundreds of times in recent history, because that's not how the spectacle works. We continue to passively absorb whatever we're told, just like religious people do when confronted with failures of their faith. And who can blame us? I mean, the spectacle is really good at constantly tempting us with passive consumption while avoiding any threats to its basic design. It's so good that even when something comes along that challenges the status quo of the society of the spectacle, it manages to absorb it in a process called recuperation, when a threat to the current capitalist order is somehow reshaped to appear to actually support the status quo. Recuperation is when Black Lives Matter, a movement designed to expose the problems of contemporary capitalism and police misconduct, when it's used to sell Pepsi in an ad with Kendall Jenner. It's evident when revolutionaries like Tupac, Che Guevara, or Martin Luther King Jr. can be painted on t-shirts that are mass-produced for a profit. And it's in our original example. Back to Macklemore for a minute. That anti-consumerism song he wrote about Nike's brainwashing him as a kid in his 20-year journey into realizing that we've all been misled by the spectacle, it was actually bought by Nike and used in a Super Bowl ad to sell fucking Nikes. Seriously. Now, of course, Nike cut out all of that anti-consumerism stuff and just used the first verse, where Macklemore's a 7-year-old who still fully believes he can fly with Jordans once he gets those shoes. But that's the point. And in the realm of recuperation squared, when Macklemore was called out for selling his song to Nike, he actually wrote an open letter saying, basically, yeah guys, that sucks. I wish they would have included the anti-capitalism verse, but at least a ton of new listeners will hear my work, and they'll have a chance to hear the full version. Again, the only real goal of the society of the spectacle, the only real gauge of success, is to grow the society of the spectacle. Macklemore is measuring success quantitatively, not qualitatively. Debord's words here too. Because it is in the society of the spectacle. How good a song or a music video is, well, that's based on how many downloads it gets, period. How good a commodity is, well, that's gauged on how many of the exact same product did you sell to consumers for a profit. How many people did you convince that this one-size-fits-all, mass-produced cheap piece of shit would make them feel like the woman they were born to be or the coolest kid in class? It's pretty gross, but it's also pretty unavoidable given our current cultural state. But what about resistance? I mean, if Debord's right, it sounds like there is literally no escaping or even challenging the spectacle. I guess I could go find a piece of land in Montana and build a house out of lumber I cut from the forest using a handsaw. I could refuse to hook up electricity, internet, sewer, or water. I could live off the land instead of using the grocery store. I could make my own clothes, walk everywhere, feed my dog food I hunt and cook. And if I do all of that, what do I accomplish? Well, I basically managed to make my life shorter, more uncomfortable, and somehow even less connected to those around me. Somehow even more alienated. What the fuck? But our friends at the Frankfurt School do offer a suggestion for combating the society of the spectacle. Something they call determinment, which leans heavily on the first part of that term, detour, as in change the path of. Since we live in a culture where consumerism and spectacle rule everything, we can't be surprised when spectacles evoke the feelings that we've been programmed to feel when we consume them. When, for example, the crowd stands in robotic unison for the national anthem, Or when Ticketmaster sells out Taylor Swift tickets in 2 minutes because millions of people participate in the ritual of commodity hunting at the same time? Or when Trump's golden shoes are snatched up for $400 a pop? Or when the preacher says, "Can I get an amen?" and the crowd mindlessly replies, "Amen." Those are moments that can be tinkered with to expose the spectacle in all its blasé-ness, all its fabricated fakery. At a tournament is an American flag with the stars replaced by corporate logos. It's a Pepsi icon redrawn to look like an obese child. It's a Marlboro cigarette ad vandalized to say it's a bore. It's a Dare shirt redesigned with pro-drug messaging. It's a podcast called Dr. Junkie in an act of reappropriation. You can Google all these examples to find images of them, spectacles which I'm suggesting, ironically, that you can use in place of the real to make sense of your world. And again, that's why the spectacle is so unavoidable, so powerful. It's really not something we can just give up and throw out, because what would we use instead? We have to figure out a way to reshape it, to pull its power away from the capitalist billionaires who currently control most of it. And that's where I'll pick up next episode, since I feel like this philosophy deep dive has already gone far too long. Oh wait, one more thing. Drugs. The connection to the war on drugs is probably obvious at this point, but to stamp it clearly, consider how we all know so much bullshit about drugs and about drug users. It's from the same pro-neoliberalism, pro-capitalism, pro-consumerism spectacles designed to get us to mindlessly stare at stupid shit all day, to perform the role of docile, miserable, working citizen. Many drugs challenge that model outright simply by working the way they do. Psychedelics, for example, literally cause us to rethink taken for granted norms and connect ideas to other ideas in ways that we often fail to do in real life. And that's the sort of thing that might result in somebody saying, "Wait a sec, what the fuck am I doing working a miserable job just to barely scrape by until I die an early death?" So in that regard, some drugs are a direct threat to capitalism. Other drugs pose threats to the current system's requirements to work those jobs. Imagine a factory full of welders who all start popping Vicodin all day, and you can imagine why the powers that be prefer to keep the cap on the meds, so to speak. All of that can also change via the spectacle. We can use what's already there, including our modes of learning about the world, to update our cultural understanding of drugs and addiction. Podcasts, publications like Filter Magazine, updated films and documentaries about successful, helpful, pro-social drug use, narratives of how bad prison life and homelessness are, two of the results of drug use in a culture at war with drugs. These are spectacles we can use to reshape the narrative. The spectacle did this to us, but we can use the spectacle to fix it. Thanks for listening. I'm Ben Boyce.